time to step up your game.
Let's get ready to rumble!
You're listening to Game On,
Falcon Punch!
your inside track to gaming and fitness.
Of course!
Mamma mia! We've got interviews one-on-one with your gaming experts.
Hi, folks. This is Jim Cummings.
This is Courtney Taylor.
This is Duke Nukem.
And we'll help you keep fit along the way.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
Get ready, because Game On starts now.
Game on!
Game on!
Game on!
Hey everyone, Jeff Johnson here. It's GameNTrain.com. It's another edition of Game On, and it is Facebook Friday. Now, as I mentioned in our other video for this week, if you're looking for this week's question of the week, you're going to want to check out the other video because that's where you're going to find it. We've decided to split up our Facebook Friday videos into two separate videos. One of them will address the reactions to our question from last week. The other one will introduce the question from this week. So you're going to see that on this article on GameNTrain.com. You'll be able to easily find both of the videos there. One of them, again, is dealing with your reactions. The other one dealing with the new question of the week for Facebook Friday. This week, we're talking about that series that was made by Sony, the reality TV show, The Tester, so be sure to check that out. But right now, we're going into our question from last week. Last week, we asked you, what do you think about this question? Because this is a good one. We asked you, do you think all next-generation consoles should be backwards compatible? Because this one sort of divided the fan base, and it's going to be interesting to go over all of the reactions that we received. We got another great amount of reactions from N4G, Google+, Facebook, from Twitter, from the GameNTrain website itself, and of course from YouTube. So let's go over these reactions. These are your thoughts on should all next-generation consoles be backwards compatible. Let's take a look. And these are your thoughts on our question from last week. Should all next-generation systems be backwards compatible? We're starting our search with Facebook because it's called Facebook Friday. It only makes sense that we start there. And our first comment comes from JD Blosser. JD Blosser says, I think it is going to really hurt them a lot. The jump in games is going to be so much less than previous gens, and people are going to be a lot less likely to jump to next generation with no games. Not to mention, how can people trust digital content again? People are going to stay with old generations much longer, or switch to PC where their collection is always available. JD Blosser, I get what you're saying here. It makes sense that not having the games from the last generation could hurt and could alienate a lot of the fan base. But it will be interesting to see what happens with this. Again, JD Blosser, thank you very much for giving your comments on this one. Now, let's go over to Michelle Bannock. Michelle Bannock gave her comments on this issue as well, and she says, that would be very unfortunate if the PS4 is not backwards compatible. It is one of the features that have made us PlayStation fans. We still have some of our original PlayStation games, Final Fantasy, Tomb Raider, Resident Evil, etc. And it's awesome that we only need the one console to play all of these games. Totally agree with you there, Michelle. I still have my PS1 games and my PS2 games, and it's great to be able to know that you have those older games, you can play them on this new system without actually having to buy them again. Something like the Wii, for instance. I could buy my Nintendo Classic games for the Virtual Console. I'm not going to complain about it, but I wish there was a way that you could sort of determine that you had these old games and can just sort of download them again without having to pay for them again. That being said, that kind of thinking's impossible to pull off. I mean, how do you keep track of who bought what game from the Nintendo generation? But still, knowing that we can play these games on the PlayStation 3 was one of the killer apps for that system. The PlayStation 4, now saying that it's not backwards compatible, again, could see some alienation there. So there's our Facebook comments. Let's jump over to another platform. Let's jump over to GameNTrain, where we saw quite a few comments there. First off, Big Chad. Big Chad is back with us, and he says, I like having backwards compatibility. There's always going to be a few favorite great games and those cult classics you missed that you find out about much later from the older generation that you're so grateful for the ability to play on the next generation system without having to have or buy that older system and hook to your TV with only so many AV ports to go around. It adds value and expands the game library exponentially. And he actually had more comments than that. Big Chat also says system sales pretty much double with the inclusion of backward compatibility. Look at the numbers of PS2, Nintendo DS, Game Boy Color, Wii, Game Boy Advance. That pretty much sums it up in my opinion. If the next box has backwards compatibility, Sony might have to worry about that with the PS4. For other comments that we saw here, Big Chad jumped in about the Steam box and says that it will be a force to be reckoned with. With PS4 having all the hoopla at the moment and next box announcements coming soon, no one is waiting for E3. So you have to wonder, why so soon? It's because of the Steam box. And it's going to be an interesting year indeed for gaming, for sure. Though the average consumer has no idea what the Steam box is about, I'm sure they will find out soon enough, if they can get enough product placement out there. And you know what? This is an aspect that we really have to take into consideration as well. The Steam box is something that could be coming up in the future. And don't forget, the Ouya. There's another one, or it's Ouya or Ouya, however you pronounce it, but there's two next generation systems that are coming our way that could very well revolutionize how we go about our gaming. And PlayStation 4 not having backwards compatibility, don't know if that's going to impact how it does against the Steam box and the Ouya, but you need to make sure to not alienate the fan base that you have. So, this move here could be a problem for them. We don't know what's going to happen with the Xbox. As Big Chad mentioned, that's another thing that could happen. If the Xbox comes out and says you can play your Xbox 360 games or your original Xbox games on the new system, that could sway people who are going to buy either the Xbox or the PS4, but I think it has more to do with if you are a hardcore follower of either of those brands. Regardless, I have a Wii, I have a PS3, I have an Xbox 360. Backwards compatibility had nothing to do with my decision to buy any of those systems. What had to do with my decision there was the games that you'd find there. If there's good gameplay to be had, if they actually buy the systems. So, Big Chad, thank you very much for your comments. Great to have you on the show again. Eric Hoff, the boss man, he gave his thoughts as well, and he says, I think the issue with backwards compatibility is the cost for the system developer to implement it. They basically have to install the older system within the new console, some things not included, of course, and after a few years or so, many aren't playing the older games anyway. Do I like backwards compatibility? Yes. Do I want it? Yes. Am I willing to pay an extra $100 for a system to include it? Not really sure there. I have a ton of downloaded games which, unless I keep my old Xbox, will never again be played. In the end, I think the Steam box is going to come and take the industry by storm. There's the Steam box once again. And since they run on a PC framework, no matter how often you update your console, you will still be able to play all the games in your library, even those 10-year-old ones. So, really, the longevity of the Steam box comes into question here. And if we think way, way down the road, are we going to see advancements in that technology that renders those older games obsolete? Because let's face it, this is a constantly developing industry. This next generation of consoles is possibly going to change things in ways that we've never seen. Because not only are you competing with something like the Ouya or the Steam box, you have to realize a lot of the gaming market is right now dominated by handheld. And I'm talking about your tablets, like your iPad, or also your Android phones, or your iPhones. All of those are becoming mobile gaming platforms. There's no wonder why Angry Birds is one of the top-selling games that's out there right now. And that's why you're seeing a lot of the interactiveness that we're seeing from these new systems. Wii U, including a tablet base for the controller. The PS4, thinking about the social sharing element of it, because that's one thing we all like to do. We love to be able to social share our games, and that's something that has really come about in the recent console generations. Plus, the fact that you can download in the background. That's something that the tablet systems, that's something that like the iPad, the iPhone, the Android, they're all doing already. Your games are downloading in the background while you're playing them, which is huge. I don't like sitting at that waiting screen. I don't like sitting there waiting for a PS3 game to download and then have to install it into the system as well. That to me is a huge waste of time. But at the same time, when I look at a game like Mass Effect 3, when I got it for the Xbox 360, it came on a disc, but I still downloaded everything that came with it. It took me forever to do. It was still worth it to play that game. So, all depends on how you're marketing yourself. All depends on how you're going to go about it. Eric, thank you very much for your comments there. Science, aka Psycho, otherwise known as Simon Marshall, one of our writers on GameNTrain. Be sure to check out his new feature, Simon Says. It's definitely worth a look. But Simon says, I think that the next generation consoles will need everything in their armory to compete with the ever-growing PC gaming, mobile, and free-to-play markets. I think that the current generation with the PS3 and Xbox 360 has been so defining that it would be hard to ignore backwards compatibility. And with the constant releases this generation of HD re-releases, old games will always have a place, and backwards compatibility will be a cheaper way for the gamers to get their kicks from their classic games instead of forking out more money for an HD version or, by the next generation, a 3D version. And there's that word that really, I don't know what to think about it. HD, yes. 3D, I've always had issues with the 3D version. I think that 3D, it didn't work in the 80s. Why are we trying it again? It's not going to work. That's my train of thought. I'm sure there's people that would argue with me, and you know what? I think that could even be a good question of the week down the road as well. But yes, this is something that we're seeing. As I mentioned earlier, the next generation consoles have to compete with the PC gaming market, the mobile market, and the free-to-play markets. Big example, Watch Dogs. They announced that Watch Dogs is going to be a PC game first and then ported to the consoles. You're seeing this game getting preference there. And it's not the first time we've seen something like that. The new SimCity is a PC game only. The Witcher was originally a PC game before coming over to an Xbox 360 format. So games are going more towards the PC gaming market. PC gaming also got a lot of games that we never saw, but at the same time, we got a lot of games on the console markets that the PC gaming markets never got. So it's a balancing act. There's always going to be a benefit to all the different sides. It's picking the games you want to play when you want to play it. And again, gameplay is going to define how well these consoles do. So, Simon, thank you very much for your comments there. And that's our comments from the GameNTrain group. Let's move on over to our next section. Let's move over to N4G. We got two comments there, actually. One of them is from Little Bro RX. And the comment that he has made is saying, I find it funny how people ignore this and defend Sony for not providing backwards compatibility. But I bet money that if the Wii U didn't, and Sony did, then those same people would be making the biggest deal about it and praising Sony for it while bashing Nintendo. Basically, on this site, N4G, something is only a problem if it's not done by Sony, and okay if it is. I've seen too many people brag about how the PS4 having higher specs makes it a better purchase choice than the Wii U, but then say they wouldn't get a Durango if it had higher specs than the PS4. And you know what, Lobro, I can agree with you on this one. I understand what you're saying here, because a lot of it is almost a console bias, where you see people supporting the PlayStation but not supporting Nintendo for their choices, or supporting the Xbox and Bill Gates' Wonder Machine but not supporting the PS4 and the Wii U. As I mentioned earlier, every console has its benefits, and it's the gameplay that we should be evaluating it on. Forget about the specs, because there's another way that you can interpret that term. Specs as in speculation. You don't know what the system is going to be able to do until you actually see it in action. It doesn't matter if the game has the prettiest graphics possible. It needs to have good gameplay. And that's what we'll need to see from any of the games coming out on any of the consoles going ahead for them to be successful. So, Lowbro, thank you very much for your comments. Peter Thomas, our own social admin. And this is where I'm glad he's commented, because he's giving a lot of clarification here. And this comment will do it justice. I actually probably don't need to add anything to this. There is a lot of confusion about backwards compatibility, and frankly, the topic gets me heated beyond belief. I will say this: there are people who believe backwards compatibility isn't important to a consumer purchase, and maybe it isn't, but I can say that the convenience certainly isn't something to take lightly. There are people who say that backwards compatibility wasn't always available, but they've been doing backwards compatibility for a long time, and it became more prevalent when we moved to a disc-based medium. With all of the emulation software out there today, it is truly a wonder how backwards compatibility isn't just a standard anymore. This is especially true when I look at the PS3, which had PS2 compatibility, lost it, and can now play PS2 games via the PSN, but not via the optical discs. It just doesn't make sense. You are right, though. Everyone made a big stink about the Wii U having to go into a new channel to play Wii games, but the PS4 is talking about no backwards compatibility at all, and the PSN titles not transferring over. It's all very frustrating. So the thing we have to look at here: will PS4 offer an alternate route for anybody who has purchased this digital content on the PS3? Because if we've paid the money for it and it's in a digital format, there should be a way to honor that purchase on the new system. If we can't bring the games over, then at least give us some sort of a free download for a format that will work for this new system. That makes sense. That is something that should happen here. We'll see what happens, though, as time goes on. Peter, thank you very much for your clarification. Let's jump over to one more format. We've got Google+, and there was quite a bit of comments there. Let's start with Brian Allen. Brian Allen gave his comment saying that backwards compatibility is definitely a plus, but not if it significantly increases the cost of the system. And this is something that Eric Hoff had said earlier, that if it increases the cost of the system, it's not worth it in his mind. So with something like this, I agree. Cost is a factor here, but I want to be able to play my old games. Think of it this way: a loss of revenue. If you've spent all the money for the old games that were on the older systems, wouldn't it make sense to be able to bring that over to a new format? If an HD DVD player can play classic DVDs, or if a Blu-ray player can play those classic DVDs as well, what is stopping something like this? I realize that's like comparing apples and oranges, but again, it's a technology issue, a formatting issue. There's got to be a way around it. Ryan Pond, he jumped in with his comments as well. He said, I also don't see a necessity for backwards compatibility with the PS4 because the digital games from the market will likely end up being compatible with on the console, and I doubt they will stop the classic collections with how well they are selling currently. People will have their PS3 consoles until it is no longer relevant, so I don't see an issue with the physical medium games either. And I do have to throw a correction in there, where he said that the digital games from the market will likely end up being compatible on the console. That's not true. That's something that they've already said is not true. So that's an issue to consider there. But again, physical media games, it'd be great to be able to play them on this new system. That's just my standpoint. I'm coming from the standpoint that backwards compatibility is a good thing, but I do understand where you're coming from here. Everybody's got a viewpoint. Thank you, Ryan, for sharing yours. Ryan went on further to say that this whole argument is a bit ridiculous. Backwards compatibility was never a concern when the SNES, N64, PS2, or Nintendo GameCube came out, and no one will care in a year. Everyone threw a fit about backwards compatibility with the 360 and PS3 coming out, but after the first year of these consoles, everyone was so caught up in new games that they didn't even care. The same thing will happen again. People are going to reminisce about Far Cry 3 and the 50 Call of Duty games from this generation, but they aren't just going to whine about not being able to play them. They'll just throw in Black Ops 3 or Far Cry 4 or whatever sequel exists to an already completed franchise that is being rode into the ground at that moment. Just my 2 cents. And yes, thank you, Ryan, for your thoughts on that. You're right. There will be games that we'll pay attention to when they come out for these new generation systems. I still want to play my old games. That's just my thought. Anthony Vuong, he gave his thoughts and said it's like with PCs. Older games won't play on current hardware because they're built around completely different specs and operating systems that can require specific drivers or a certain piece of hardware that's not used in current models. So, really, there is a comparison there. This new system is supposed to be a lot more PC-like. Again, though, it's all specs. We'll see what happens when the system comes out. Anthony, thank you for your thoughts there. Peter Segura, a major thought from Peter here. Peter says, I believe that the steps taken by Microsoft and Sony to engineer powerful systems for their time were both good and bad. Good because it helps advance technology and game development in some respects, but bad because the architecture is much harder to emulate in their next systems because of their shift to make things easier and faster. As for how relevant it is, I think Sony realizes it's at least pertinent enough to offer streaming of their old library to fill in the void, but I'm still curious to see if PS1 and even PS2 games will be able to run via disc on PS4. Even if not at first, PS1 emulation is very easy with today's average PC, and my gaming laptop can handle PS2 games at 1080p or so. We'll see how things turn out, but I'm not someone with the mentality that once I get a PS4, my PS3 will suddenly cease to exist. I'm going to buy a next-generation system for games developed on that platform. Peter, thank you very much for your thoughts there. QTE Dad, Quick Time Event Dad, he says, we saw this with the PS3 when they decided to take backwards compatibility out. Everyone was in an uproar, but it doesn't come up as often as it did then. Now that the new systems are on the horizon, everyone is up in arms about the lack of this feature. Don't they have a reason to be, though? Really, you're not going to have that many games to play with this new system when they first come out. And if we have paid the money for the games, why not play them? That just makes sense. One comment left, and I've saved the best for last because this one is a bit of a doozy. Bradley Burke made the comment saying, do you wish you had an 8-track adapter on your cell phone? If not, then backwards compatibility isn't a concern, least not for me. What the... Okay, let me try to stress this out here, because this is something that's bugged me ever since I've read this comment here. The thing that I gotta stress about this entire comment is the absurdity that goes around it. First off, 8-tracks have nothing to do with cell phones. 8-tracks. Do you even know what an 8-track is? Seriously. Bear with me here on this one, because the 8-track was a format that came before the cassette tape. The cassette tape came before the CD. CD came before the MP3 player, and MP3 players were then embedded into your cell phones. We're talking about 5 levels of generational difference here. We are not talking about like importing over the Nintendo games over to the PlayStation 3. That is something that is completely off the track. It doesn't make any sense. Backwards compatibility is talking from one generation to the very next generation. We're talking about almost comparable levels of technology, and this is not talking about trying to bring the freaking 8-track over to an MP3 level. Thank you, Brad, for adding to the discussion. We greatly appreciate your comments. It's great to have you on board. Moving on. That's the last of the comments that we have for this episode. As you can tell, backwards compatibility is a very contentious issue. All sorts of different sides with all sorts of different thoughts on how it's going to work. I think it's just a matter of waiting and seeing what'll happen. In the meantime, thank you everybody for giving your thoughts on this one. I'm Jeff Johnson. You're listening to Game On.